Welcome to Manhwa Recaps, spoilers ahead, watch out, and take care. Huge shout out and special thanks to the channel members. This video is sponsored by myself. I just opened up a Patreon for those of you who want individual chapters, or shorter daily uploads, that aren't enough for full-length parts on the channel yet. So far I have posted the latest chapter of Archmage's curriculum, and tomorrow I will do Steel Emperor. Sorry for the interruption. The series starts with a man explaining that a mercenary who does not die is considered third-rate. The reason they get paid the big bucks is because they are willing to die for their masters. Even though he has to listen to bullshit from employers every single day, there is nothing he can really do about it, as that is just the life of a mercenary in the end. We hear him saying that all nobles are the same. When they are in need, they will offer up land, and make grand requests, acting like they will even grant them titles, but in the end, they all change their tune, as if on cue. Spouting all sorts of creative bullshit, he turns towards a man, saying that what he just said truly takes the cake for the biggest piece of dog shit he has ever heard, but surely he just heard wrong. As we see a man standing opposite of him, he calls him the commander-in-chief. He says that he didn't mishear him, as he just ordered him to die. The mercenary asks the commander if he has forgotten who he is. The commander says he hasn't. He is Jake, captain of the Fang mercenaries. Jake laughs, saying that for him to say that despite knowing who he is, he didn't know he had such a sense of humor, because otherwise he never would have ordered a piece of trash mercenary to fight, and die with the honor of a noble knight. The commander thinks about it, and says that he thinks he did get ahead of himself, and he apologizes if he gave him the wrong idea. Jake asks what he means, as the commander says he wanted to entrust him with a final mission, as he knows their repeated defeats have all but sealed their fate. And now the rebels' blades are at the very throat of the Crawford family, the guardians of this land for generations. And the realization that there's nowhere left to run made him ramble. Jake asks if that's really all, saying he understands completely, given the situation they're in, and it looks like it's finally time for him to bail. If a man with the greatest talent in the Empire is cornered like this, that says it all. And it's a shame, as this guy was a really decent noble, but a final mission in the middle of this mess. He must be trying to get him to secure a retreat path, but he guesses he can count that as one last chore before getting his final pay. The commander tells him that the mission is simple. The rebels will launch an all-out offensive tomorrow, so he should stand with him, and hold them off for just a bit, just until his lord has safely escaped. But he doesn't know if that's even possible. Regardless, he needs to do it just until he dies, as he'll settle the balance with this, as a gem this size covers 3 years of his entire mercenary corps operating cost. Jake slaps it out of his hand, and the commander asks what he's doing. Jake says that's his line, wondering if he really took him for a moron just because he's always smiling. His orders are basically telling his group to become meat shields. Even if they join the fight, they'd only last a moment, and he wants to throw them away just to buy his master a few extra seconds to run. And fine, let's say they did hold out, then what? Those bastards won't just let them go, they'd crucify them, and make examples out of the ones they catch alive. The commander tells him that they are mercenaries, not knights. The enemy knows that as well, so once he is dead they won't go out of their way to chase them. Jake is a tough guy, saying that's how things usually go in this line of work, but he knows the truth just as much as he does. To those guys, his mercenary group is a sworn enemy that they want to tear limb from limb. As we get a flashback to the group of enemies attacking their base, they spot a soldier coughing against a tree. The commander of that group orders his men to go check it out, and when he does, he gets stabbed in the throat. Horrified by the betrayal, they quickly realize that's not what's going on, it's a trap, and that this was laid by the Fang mercenaries. The commander calls them bastards, asking if they would really disguise themselves as dead soldiers, saying they know nothing of honor. Of course, Jake cuts his head off, and when it rolls onto the floor, he looks back at them, because the guy's right, they have no honor, they are not knights. Jake continues explaining to his commander that he's cut the throats of countless other enemy commanders. And as he knows, that's the only reason he survived this far. Right now, those bastards are dying to tear them apart before they even get to his lord. Jake then realizes it, saying that he must have already accounted for that, and that's why he's intending to make them draw the attention of the enemies. The commander says that he merely hopes that he'll carry out his mission. If he didn't, he'll have no choice but to cut him down, and seize command of the Fang mercenaries himself. As he reaches for his blade, Jake quickly distances himself, saying that he thought he was a bit different from the other nobles, but it turns out he's the biggest piece of shit of them all. The commander says that he's sincerely sorry, but Jake tells him not to be. This actually works out perfectly, because taking the head of a bastard like him, and offering it to the guys camped out there won't leave a bad taste in his mouth. The commander asks if he's planning to offer his head to the rebels, and beg for their lives. Jake says they are. He'd love more than nothing to hand it over, and bolt, but he already made preparations to keep them here. In that case, as their captain, he needs to do everything within his power until the very end. Even those rebel bastards should be satisfied with 2 commander-level heads, and let the rest of his men go free. The commander asks if he's really offering his own head just to save his subordinates. Jake says that of course he is. He dragged them here on his own selfish whim, and promised to show them that they could achieve their dreams, even if they started from the gutter. They trusted him enough to follow him here, so he asks to take the responsibility, because at the end of the day he is their captain. And that role is more important to him than anything. The commander looks genuinely baffled, and starts to laugh, saying that this is what it means to be a true leader, and it's such a shame. Instead of Crawford, he wished that he had been his lord to begin with. Jake's done with the talking, as he leaps straight at him. He screams, and the commander takes a second, before readying himself. He tells Jake to not forgive him. Jake says that he knew this would happen, but he didn't think the gap would be this massive between the two of them, and that talent is fucking absurd. But this is fine, he ordered them to run if he wasn't back on time, so he can die in peace. Besides, he was always prepared to go out like this, but he is curious that if he too had been given the same opportunities as the commander, he wonders just how high he truly could have climbed. As he starts to fall deeper, and deeper into nothingness, he then hears someone calling out to him, begging that he wakes up. He opens his eyes, as a boy is looking over him, saying please wake up. Jake asks him who he is. As the boy raises his hand into the air, he slaps the piss out of him, saying that he wants him to wake up so bad. Jake grabs his cheek, wondering if he really got hit in the face, but seriously, he doesn't know who the hell this kid is, until the kid begs that he pulls himself together. But instead of calling him Jake, he calls him by the name of Lucian. He says that it feels like something terribly wrong has happened. First of all, where is the body he's used to? His was scarred, and battered like an old rag, but this one is young, and it's so pristine that there's not a visible wound in sight. But also, there's his brat. Just a moment ago he was slapping his cheek, but now he's wailing at the top of his lungs. He sniffles, and says it's such a relief. He truly thought that he had passed away, and his heart nearly stopped. If that had happened, obviously he, his personal servant, would have been executed, and putting that aside, it would be a huge tragedy for their family. Jake wonders what nonsense this guy has been spouting the entire time about the young master, and the personal servant thing. Most importantly, he definitely died back when fighting the commander, so thoroughly that he could not have been saved, but how in the world is his head still attached? He starts to think about it calmly, and says judging by the situation, there's only one conclusion to draw. He has entered the body of a complete stranger, and to top it off, he has a killer face card. As he's staring in the mirror, he says just by looking at it, he can tell that his body belongs to a noble, as it's radiating it. He must be a scion of a household that simply reeks of money, and he needs to dig up more info on this guy. He starts to recall the kid's name from the body's memories. He calls him Hans, saying that he has a question. Hans tells him to go ahead, and ask. Jake then wonders what year it is. Hans says that he must be groggy because of the malignant energy, and it's the imperial year 846. Jake says this is 15 years before the day he died, which means he's returned to the past. He doesn't know how this happened, but if he gets surprised at everything, there will be no end to it. First, he wants to focus on what needs to be done. He then asks if he has a death wish, and Hans asks what he's talking about. Jake asks how dare a mere servant touched his master's body without permission. He asks if the laws of this place have changed while he was unconscious. Hans bows, and says that he's so sorry. He was flustered earlier, and committed a grave rudeness. He tells him that his noble name is Lucian Valdec. He is the third son of the great house Valdec. Jake is surprised, saying that if it's Valdec, it must be the same family that he knows. It's a pillar that has supported the empire throughout its long history. A historic, prestigious clan positioned as the emperor's closest aides, boasting power comparable to the imperial family itself. In other words, they're just a great house. He's quite familiar with the circumstances of this family, because the Valdec estate is where, 15 years ago, he worked as a guard for several years. But when he died and opened his eyes again, he thought he'd return to his old job. He's the third son of the Valdec family. He laughs, saying that's absurd. All of his life, they forced him to endure every humiliation imaginable just because his status was so damn low, and only now he's handed the perfect opportunity. He then recalls his wish of how far he could have risen, and now it must be as if fate itself wants to know that question too, asking him to prove it. He says if that's the wish they're looking for, then he'll give them the perfect show. He opens the door, and he says that he'll show them just how high he will climb, and how he will live. Since he'll be living as Lucian, we'll call him that from now on instead of Jake. He says that it sure is a grand duchy. He's been to all sorts of places during his life as a mercenary, but in terms of splendor, this is by far the greatest, and it's a place he needs to get used to as soon as possible. He then realizes that ever since earlier, all of the servants here are looking at him very oddly, and he doesn't know what's going on. He asks Hans if it's his imagination. Hans tells him that's only natural, as he began his seclusion, and hasn't met a soul other than himself, and it's already been a year and 2 months. He sighs, asking him what kind of nonsense that is, and wonders what he was thinking that he kept himself cooped up in the corner of his room like that. And if he accepts that, the mindset of a noble is hard to understand. Acting as he pleases would have been impossible here. Because in this place, with firm principles and conviction, the giant who has protected the Grand Duke Sigmund resides here, and there's no way that man would simply stand by and watch as his own son rot away in the corner of his room. In that case, either Lucian is such a problem child that he's practically abandoned him, or there are some special circumstances that made Sigmund turn a blind eye. Until he figures out what those stares truly mean, he must avoid meeting him as much as possible. A butler then says the report, stating it's true that he is awake, and seeing his face after a whole year makes him incredibly happy. He asks if there's any discomfort in his movements. Lucian says that come to think of it, the Valdec family had this guy too. It is the head butler named Edwin. He entered the mansion as a hostage from a hostile family in childhood, yet was recognized for his outstanding ability, and took charge of all family affairs. He is pretty much Sigmund's right hand. Out of everyone he had to run into, he's one of the people he should avoid the most. There's no way he wouldn't notice the behavior change of someone from the bottom rings of society, even if he hadn't seen him for over a year. Because he doesn't know any noble etiquette, the only fact he can rely on is that the head butler hasn't seen him for over a year. In that case, he's going to try mimicking the most noble-like human he knows. He then starts to do exactly that. He thanks Edwin for his concern, saying that, thanks to him he's recovered significantly. Taking this opportunity, he came out to look into the family affairs he neglected while studying indoors. To meet the head butler right away means luck is on his side, and by any chance, he wants to know if there are any mishaps in the family. Edwin tells him that the family is well as always, but it's more of a relief that he remains unchanged. He laughs, saying that with Edwin guarding this place, there couldn't have possibly been any mishaps, but he's glad that he's not suspicious, and tells him, as expected, he worried for nothing, and he's going to return because being out for so long makes him tired. Edwin, though, tells him to wait a moment, as he urges him to delay his return, because right now, he is being summoned. He realizes this is bad, then later we see him standing before his father, the Grand Duke Sigmund. Sigmund then says that he will ask him one more time. Sigmund asks why he is still alive. Lucian stares at him for a second, then asks what he means by that. Sigmund says he intended to overlook it, him using his mother's death as an excuse, forgetting his duty, and acting like a spoiled child, but he finally crossed the line. For him to not be content with staging a protest by locking himself away for over a year, and for him to treat even his own life lightly, attempting to harm himself. Lucian wonders what the hell that even means, then thinks about it, saying the reason that Hans was making such a fuss was because of this. He tells him that there was a misunderstanding, but Sigmund tells him that for the last time, he needs to spill out the thoughts that he's kept hidden in that narrow mind of his. Sigmund says that this was all for a single purpose in the first place. Using his weak body and own hands, he shoves sleeping pills into his own mouth to create a commotion, and he wants to know the reason. Lucian is surprised, and says he wondered why he had no memory of the kid, and now he finally remembers. The third son, 15 years ago, when he was working as a guard here, he ended up dead, and he remembers the funeral service. He explains that Sigmund has 4 sons under his wing, and they all have different mothers. In the 10 years he worked here, he ran into the young lords and their mothers several times, but Lucian, or even his mother, he has no memory of meeting face to face. His mother died of illness early on, and Lucian, not long after he started working, due to an unknown reason, followed after her. Back then, he just assumed the mother and son were sickly, and let it slide, but there was a separate real reason. His mother's death and his unstable position within the family must have been too much for his mental to handle at such a young age. What he eventually chose was sleeping pills just shy of a lethal dose. He was trying to get even a little bit of the Grand Duke's attention. However, during this seclusion that lasted over a year, he failed to calculate his weakened body, and unable to handle the effects of the drugs, he died right then and there. Now though, he understands how much of a headache this has become. To a son he hasn't seen in a year, he thought the scolding was a bit too harsh, but it reaches the point where it seems natural. No matter if he's Sigmund or not, he's still the father of this body, and his insights must be churning. However, right now, it's not the time for him to be considerate of someone else's feelings. He's on the verge of falling off a cliff himself, as he deftly said last. And this is a final ultimatum. He can hear it now, the sound of the cracks forming in his golden future. If right here even a single word doesn't satisfy his Sigmund, at minimum, he's stuck as a priest in a remote monastery, saying goodbye to the secular world forever, or dragged to a harsh northern territory, suffering from the cold of snowfields and beasts for a lifetime, living a total shitty life. But he refuses that. It's a new life that he barely obtained, even after getting his head cut off. It's precious, and he knows the future will be grand, and he won't just let some other family's personal affairs ruin it. He tells his father that since he asked for it, he'll tell him. First, the smearing the family name with his foolishness and causing him great concern, he can do nothing but offer his sincere apologies. It is his fault, with no room for excuses. And he will accept whatever punishment he gives him. Sigmund says that's not going to change anything, but Lucian says, therefore, from now on, sure that it would be all right for him to rejoice to his heart's content. Sigmund genuinely looks surprised, but tells him that what's happened has already happened. Lucian says he knows that, therefore, instead of trying to salvage the past that he's already made, he'll live diligently for the future ahead, and not as the Grand Duke, but as a father, he should offer just one word of encouragement to a child in the wrong as he's repenting before his parent. And that the parent should embrace the child, as that's the proper duty between father and son bound by the laws of heaven. Edwin is surprised, saying that he felt his atmosphere had changed, but for this to be the same Lucian that he knew who was always cowering, he finds it pretty hard to believe. There's a lot of awkward silence after, until Sigmund finally asks how dare he raise his voice in front of him, and lecture him on his duties as a parent, but he smiles, saying that he's lived long enough to see everything. Lucian bows and smiles too, and is just glad that that shit actually worked. He says instead of running away, ramming straight into it was the answer, rather than a rat that walks on eggshells, valuing the spirit of his son that knows how to fight back. That is what Sigmund wanted. Sigmund says it seems he's learned to be quite brazen after coming back from the dead, but since he mentioned diligence himself, he'll ask him first what he intends to do from now on. Lucian says that first he'll fix his body that's broken, and after that, recalling how he had such a gap in swordsmanship when he died to the commander, he tells his father that he intends to learn the sword properly. Sigmund is just surprised, and Lucian says that he needs to resolve his body first, but if he eats and sleeps diligently, it'll probably work out somehow. Sigmund can't believe it, but decides to accept it, saying that he has a way with words, but whether it's bluffing or not, he'll know by watching. He tells Edwin to give him that again, without being specific. He says that rather than a few words that don't resonate, that will be more useful. Lucian wonders what it is, and Edwin says that he'll process it so it is immediately available. Lucian, though, is still just wondering what that means. And later, outside of his estate, we see carriages full of items being delivered into his living room. When he opens the chest, what he sees is nothing but gold, and he says that this is what a high noble is after all, and that this is a very large allowance, and for it to be just for 1 month, it's actually worth a shot for him to try it. He could completely overhaul this weak body, and make an elixir from the future. Sometime later, at the garden, we see Sigmund. Edwin says that this is the place that the late Grand Duchess cherished, especially during her life. Sigmund hadn't visited in a while, so he must be coming here because of Lucian's change. Even though he fell out of his favor for a moment, since he is the child of the Grand Duchess, who he cherished so much, there's no way that he would let him go so easily. Sigmund then says that it was truly pathetic, as Lucian was always busy rolling his eyes around as if he was afraid or something, and whining like a wild dog if he raised his voice even a little. But now, his attitude was so different from hers, and he had considered that the only resemblance was his mother's appearance. But for the first time today, the thought occurred to him that he might have been wrong, and he must have seen it too, that he was looking straight into his eyes, stating his opinion. Edwin says that he did see it, and it was a pretty confident appearance. And that Lucian has a tender heart and is deep in thought, so he'd probably hesitated for a moment compared to the other young masters. But it makes sense as he has his blood flowing through him after all. Sigmund says that it remains to be seen, and the tasks placed before that child from now on are things that can never be solved with just a few words. Edwin tells him there's a problem. He resumed the support funds that were stopped for Lucian, but circumstances of some of it being leaked to the outside have been confirmed. And upon investigation, it appears that the second young master, Yorid, is involved. Furthermore, he dismissed the head maid who was assisting the third young master, and placed his own close associate in that spot, revealing a blatant intent to keep him in check. Sigmund says that he's a capable child, but the problem is his vessel is narrow. He understands he has deep feelings against the third one due to matters with his maternal family, but for him to be this persistent, he didn't think about it. Edwin asks if they should take some countermeasures, but Sigmund tells him that he doesn't want to intervene in this matter. Edwin says that that would be too harsh on someone who has just started to take his first steps. Sigmund says it's a petty trick that wouldn't have even worked if he had managed his surroundings properly, and even if that is the price the third one pays for not coming to his senses for the last year, it works out well as they can see how he'll handle it this time. If he can't handle that, there would be no reason to have expectations. And even if the blood of the Valdec family becomes the key, opening the door must always be done by one's own hands. A few days later, the maids are talking about how he's locked himself in the room again, and we see Hans looking anxious. He explains that it's the third day since the support funds have been coming in, and that Lucian said the support resumed because he talked with his father, and it went well. But considering the relationship between the two, it must have not been easy at all, and he must have had tremendous courage as he sees Lucian shaking. He says that now he intends to move forward, even if he has to turn his back on the sadness. Of course, Lucian is not shaking because of fear, just because this dude is a greedy pig. Back in his room, we see it's full of scents from a bunch of herbs. He wipes some sweat off of his brow, and says that Hans must be full of curiosity, but seeing him guarding the door well as ordered means he's quite loyal. Starting with brewing tools that the son of a Grand Duke would never have touched in his life, and an herb that is filthy expensive because it only grows under moonlight, and whose common usage hasn't been established yet. And even though he squandered his entire allowance buying the moonlight herb, it's not too late for him to continue buying as much as he can. And he might look like a crazy person now, but in just 1 year, it'll go to over 20 times the price, and it'll skyrocket mindlessly. And he'll have made such a profit. He says that he sure does have to hand it to the Alchemist Guild for their boldness. At that point, the success of it must have been unclear, but they scraped up all of the moonlight herbs in the entire empire, well, at least the ones they could find. It's a gamble of a lifetime. But the guild's fate should be secured with this, and thanks to that boldness, they'll make the unprecedented elixir that ended up shaking the empire before. It's called the Drink of the Gods, nectar, and due to the arrogance of mentioning God for a mere drug, they even faced the danger of blasphemy charges. But once its efficacy became known, everyone was busy praising it as if nothing happened. He smiles, saying there's a proposition that had never been denied for over 1,000 years. The realm of a martial artist is determined the moment they are born at that limit. It is an absolute law that no one can defy. In nature, as constitution never changes. What shattered that common sense into pieces was nectar itself. Just by drinking this, it transformed even those with zero talent into useful swordsmen. Of course, what he made falls far short of the original's efficacy, and is nothing more than a mass-produced type, but to raise up a broken body to this extent, there is nothing better than this right now. He says that Lucian should consider himself lucky, as later, when a chaotic era began across the empire, the first thing to burn was the Alchemist Guild, because the nectar recipe that shook the balance of power was too dangerous in itself. Thanks to that, it vanished from the world. However, he managed to gather clues and make something similar. Of course, most people who experimented like him died from side effects, but that's enough yapping. As he starts chugging the potion, he says right now it's very important. As the result of the transformation and making nectar's power your own is dry for mana. Depending on how well the process of circulation, of spreading this throughout the body and retrieving it, works, the quality and power that can be drawn out differs vastly from person to person. Currently, he has borrowed the power of nectar to forcefully widen the blocked paths within his body, but even if they're open, he can't understand the situation he's in. The body's resistance and pain that must occur when accepting mana doesn't exist. On the contrary, it's spreading unhindered, as if it's finding its rightful place. Even the body of a newborn baby usually has impurities blocking circulation. Many realize that from the beginning, Lucian's body didn't have that many issues, and that it was actually the body of a genius. He thought he was a small fish in the ocean, but he's much closer to a whale. Some time later, as the sun starts to go down, Hans is looking out the window, and then begins to pace throughout the hallway. He hears the sound of the door opening, and Lucian asks if anything happened while he was busy. Hans runs over, crying, saying that he has no idea how long he's been in there. He didn't even answer when he called him, and because he told him not to come in no matter what, he was worried that something might have gone wrong. He looks a little startled, saying that he was so worried. As he sees Lucian looks entirely different, Lucian looks down at him, and Hans starts to wonder what happened. He says that it's definitely him, but it also doesn't seem like him at the same time. Lucian sighs, saying this just like Hans to notice. As he watched Lucian closer than anyone, he must have sensed that something's changed. His physical body needs time and proper nutrition, so there aren't major changes, but what matters is in the inside. It is changing at an unbelievable speed, and Lucian's innate constitution made it possible, and he's certain of it now that his potential is the same league as the legends who changed the world, in the future that he knows. If he plays his cards right, he can easily surpass his prime from his mercenary days within only a year. He tells Hans that he owes this opportunity thanks to him. Hans asks what he means, and Lucian says that rewards and punishments must always be clear, and that he's only going to say it once. He needs to scrape together everything he has, and even sell his underwear if he has to, and go all in as he guarantees him a smooth ride to the top, as they can go to the skies together. Hans starts to cringe, and Lucian says that he's so jealous of Hans, as back in his day they didn't have nobles like this. Hans just wonders what the hell's wrong with them. 1 week later, in their estate's forest, we see them walking through it. Lucian's very nonchalant, and even whistling, saying that it's so refreshing, as he didn't think life would be this easy. Feasts are served like clockwork, his room gets cleaned without him having to lift a finger, and they even prepare his bedding for him. Hans' habit of starving used to be part of his daily routine, now he never feels hungry. Thanks to that, not only was he able to focus fully on recovery, but he could also address the one thing that's been weighing in on his mind. At this point in time, the existence of Jake, who was a guard for the family. He confirmed with the captains that no one fitting that description ever replied, and the shift he used to work back then was occupied by a complete stranger. But this is for the best. There's no benefit to meeting him, and it would only be a distraction. But he also doesn't have the confidence to face his past self, as he'd die from embarrassment. I wonder if he and the real Lucian swap bodies. But anyways, Hans sees him tweaking, and calls out to him. When he turns, he asks if he's really thinking of going in there. He said he wouldn't even set foot near the training grounds because he hated it so much. Lucian asks if he really did that, and Hans says that he did all the time. Ever since the second young master gave him a hard time during training, he said he'd never come back. Lucian says judging by his reaction, he has a rough idea of the situation. Swordsmanship is a required skill for the children of a Grand Duke, so it must have been a perfect opportunity for the second young master, under the guise of training, to instill fear into a young Lucian. It was the perfect way to ensure that he would never set foot in the training hall again. And he tells Hans not to worry about it, as that's all in the past. Hans, though, doesn't believe it initially, but Lucian tells him that he just needs to trust his words, and follow his lead. They head into the training hall. We see some people inside chatting. One of them asks if it's really true that the third young master really came here on his own 2 feet. The other guy says he's certain, and he's currently looking around the training hall with his personal servant. Dude wonders what the hell he's thinking by stepping in here, as there's no way he could have forgotten what happened that day, but this might actually be for the best. And he says that he should go report this to him right now, and he'll make sure to have him cooked up nicely by the time he arrives. Lucian, though, says that he had high hopes, but this blows all of his expectations out of the water. Not only is there an ample supply of weapons, so he never has to worry about breakage, but also a massive space that doesn't restrict even the most intense movements. To think a single individual owns a facility like this, it's insane. If he had a place like this to train with his mercenary group, maybe more of his kids would have survived. Mustache from earlier says that he wasn't seeing things after all. To think the third young master really came here, he couldn't believe his eyes. He remembers how vividly he ran last time when he had his lesson with Yorid. It was just like a lamb being chased by a wolf. And that must be why he still seems terrified of this place. Seeing as he dragged a servant into the Sacred Hall of Warriors, he seems to still be out of his mind. The guy introduces himself as Hendrik, saying that he offers his humble greetings. A year ago he personally instructed him on his stance alongside the second young master, asking if he recalls, as it was a truly enjoyable time for him. Lucian smiles, and says that this is going to be fun because he found his first punching bag. Lucian explains that a knight is the incarnation of honor and loyalty. Usually born of noble blood, it is customary for them to master both martial arts and proper etiquette from a young age. Only when they have established their merit upon the battlefield, or through missions, and their achievements are recognized do they finally receive the title of knight from their liege, and realize the completeness of their existence. In the end, however, it means they are no different from hunting dogs wearing expensive collars. And that is why they are obligated to show courtesy to the liege who provides them with wealth and honor, and to his bloodline as well. But look at this dude's arrogant attitude. Lucian's low standing within the family must have played a part, but still, for him to be relying on his backer to act out is the biggest factor here. If it were up to him, he would have started by reforging his mind using some intense training methods, such as strapping him to a wheel, and throwing knives at him. But his father would not sit idly by, and watch such a thing. Regardless, a knight is a core military power, and a vital asset to the family. Punishment without formal procedure will only create unnecessary friction. It's not the time just yet, and he says it seems foolish to avoid the training hall simply because of what happened in the past. He intends to stop by often from now on, as he wants to learn the sword forms. And as Hendrik said, a year has passed, so he should be busy catching up. Hendrik asked if he's really mentioning the sword forms, saying that he sure is skilled at joking. But it's far too late, yet he wishes to learn them now. Lucian asked what he means, and Hendrik says that he seems unaware, so he will inform him. If you are past the age of 15, you can consider it over. Sword forms are the secret techniques, and legacy created by their ancestors. Simply mimicking the movement's grand enlightenment, it evolves the physical body, as they are the essence of ancient wisdom. However, that is only meaningful on the premise that the path of mana is open. And since it starts closing at 16, it would be nothing more or less than physical exertion for him. Sword forms without enlightenment are just a hollow shell, and nothing more than a dance. But come to think of it, that would probably suit him. And he should take the opportunity to become the Empire's #1 dancer. That way, he saves time, and finds his true calling at the same time. And if not that, he could just spend his time gardening. Everyone has a role that suits them best, after all. Hendrik feels smug, saying that he's unable to say a single word back. In the first place, the path of mana closing at 16 is a lie. In nonsense that would be exposed with a little research, but it doesn't matter. He can just feign ignorance later to smooth it over, and the objective has already been achieved. A fool crushed by his own ignorance, unable to utter a single rebuttal, is no greater than a worm. As he's getting mocked by a retainer, yet he won't move. By displaying that pathetic nature, it's the same as a year ago. Lucian starts to play into it, saying that for some reason it seems a little different from what he knows. The path of mana closes around the age of 25, not 16. So he understands there is no issue with learning it now. Hendrik asks if he's sure about those words, and Lucian says that it seems he's mistaken, asking if his brother shares this view as well. He says of course, this is such obvious common sense. But now he says this ends it. Since he mentioned his brother, he won't even think of refuting him. He says if that's the case, and his brother truly said that, it seems like the family is doomed. He grabs Hans by the head, saying that he must think so too. Hans asks why he's being dragged into this, and Lucian says that to think he is confused about common sense that even a street mutt knows. At his age, that makes no sense, and he wonders how many talents have been deprived of opportunities because of that dogshit knowledge. To think his own brother was the owner of such an empty smooth brain is crazy. Hendrik asks what he thinks he's saying right now, and Lucian tells him not to stop him. If what the knight says is true, then this is a shame to the family, and a clear crisis. But surely he's not just trying to deceive him, the son of his liege. Hendrik now is unable to say anything for a moment, before finally asking what he means by him trying to deceive him. Lucian tells him to forget what he said, and he simply misspoke because he couldn't believe the situation. There's no way a knight of the Valdec family would do something so petty. Hendrik gets a little scared, saying of course not, and Lucian says that he knew it. In that case, this is a matter they absolutely can't overlook though. He smiles, saying that he'll teach him what happens when he opens his mouth when he shouldn't. He asks Hendrik if he still doesn't understand how serious this matter is. Hendrik asks what he means, and Lucian says that if he simply intended to humiliate him, he was going to let it pass. But the fact he, and everyone else, do not look kindly upon him is due to his own faults for forgetting his duty, and wasting time in vain. So how could he rebuke them for that? However, apart from that, if he, a knight, and his brother the pillar of the Grand Duchy are hindering the recruitment of talent with incorrect knowledge, that is something he can't turn a blind eye to. That would cause cracks in the military power of the knights, and strictly speaking, it would become a grave danger to the safety of the territory's people. As one who carries the Valdec name, it's only right that he be outraged. He says that he's totally nailing this shit, and he tells Hendrik that surely he understands the gravity of the issue now, and that he had best prepare himself, as he's going to report this to his father, and request an internal crackdown. Hendrik says that there's no way. He used to tremble just from hearing his brother's name, so why is he making things this big? He then realizes that he has made a mistake. He always thought that he was frail like a lamb, but he's much closer to that of a wolf. Someone then enters the training hall, asking why there is such a fuss. Hendrik turns, and says it's none other than Jorid, and Lucian says that this is the perfect timing for him to show up. And Jorid asks his brother what he's doing here. Hendrik is just relieved to spot Jorid running over, saying that he can explain everything. He says the truth is, but Jorid cuts him off, saying that's enough. He doesn't have to explain it. He saw his disgraceful behavior with his own eyes. To be swayed by a child who's barely half his age is disappointing. He tells him to fix his expression too, unless he intends to put him in an even more difficult position. He continues walking towards Lucian, and Hans asks what they should do, as Jorid seems really angry. Lucian says that he can see it purely on his face. He's a proper noble among nobles, famous for having a dogshit personality, even back when he served as a guard. He knew this, and since his influence was weaker than the firstborn, he brought in many outsiders, but most of them met bad ends. Because once he deemed them useless, he'd frame them for crimes, and cut them loose. Lucian greets him, saying that it's actually been such a long time, asking if he's been well. Jorid calls him foolish. Lucian asks what he means by that. Jorid says he watched everything that transpired between him and Hendrik, and he dared to act in a way that tarnishes the dignity of the Valdec family. He tells him to explain more clearly, or if he means that he tarnished his dignity. Jorid says that it's been so long since Hendrik studied theory that there was a misunderstanding. Using his name to stir up unnecessary confusion was a clear mistake, and he won't let him be free of that responsibility. However, he has no intention of rebuking him for this incident, because unlike him, he knows very well the weight of his loyalty, and how much blood he has shed for the Valdec family. Furthermore, there's no way someone like him, who ran away unable to endure even the basic training, has the right to blame him, as he must learn respect for their knights, because it is thanks to them that Valdec can exist. He apologizes to everyone on behalf of his brother, saying it was the mistake of an immature child, so hopefully they can show him leniency, and he will especially take care of his foolish younger brother. Lucian says that must be how he wants to play it, and his brain works pretty fast. He was actually the one who insulted him, but he slyly twisted it into an argument against the knights, and even saved his own face in the process. He says he'll give him that much at least, and he expected no less of his brother, but there was a misunderstanding between Hendrik and himself, and he should have rightfully scolded him for daring to insult him, but instead of doing that, he granted him such valuable teachings. And him talking about how his head was empty is something he's ashamed of saying, and he never should have mentioned such embarrassing words. Jorid is just getting pissed, and Lucian continues, saying yet again he learned from his brother's benevolence. He tells Hans that they must record his brother's teachings immediately, and they have to use the finest silk. Lucian says that he needs to use this chance to wipe away his weak image, and engrave in everyone's mind, that the young master of the past they all know no longer exists. He walks up to Jorid, saying that he'd like to take his leave now, asking if he's permitted to. After all, dragging this out won't do any of them good. Jorid says he really has no fear, asking if he thinks he can leave like this. Lucian asks if he's forgotten. Father has been keeping an eye on him lately. He has nothing to lose, but he on the other hand has all to lose. He'll take this as him agreeing, and he'll be leaving now. He then whispers to Hans, saying that they need to haul ass. Hendrik watches this anxiously, asking if it's okay to let him go like this, and he can tell that Jorid's pissed because he's releasing killing intent. Outside the training hall on their way back, Hans keeps looking back anxiously, asking if they'll be okay, as he knows Jorid's personality better than anyone. He won't just let this slide, and even if they got lucky this time, he's sure that that scary mustache knight will make him vanish without a trace. Lucian says he gets it, telling him to calm down, and that only those who've experienced it know the feeling. When an incompetent superior makes a mess and feigns ignorance, it just makes you feel shitty. But he won't let that happen, so he tells Hans to get up. A mere knight wouldn't dare commit such an act, and he won't let that happen either. He already suffered a lot because of him, and when the master acts like an idiot, it's the subordinates who suffer the most. Especially since he's his personal servant, it must have been even worse. But he promises him one thing. From now on, he won't let his people be ignored, or tremble in fear because of his foolish actions, and they should do their best together. Sometime later, back at the estate, Lucian says after the training hall incident, he wondered why things were so quiet. The Jorid he knows isn't the type to just sit back and take a beating. As we see him crumbling a piece of paper, He says that this is the trick he's been cooking up, and he's been waiting for this day. Hans says that they can't just let this slide. Lucian asks if he's ready, and Hans says of course. Lucian then asks how dare he touch his allowance, and Hans says that shit was his salary. It all started with the budget plan he received today. The day he was supposed to buy extra moonlight grass, and stock up on the necessary supplies. It was the day that his account was meant to be replenished, and at least that's how it should have been. But when he opened the letter, his smile turned to that of confusion, and he dropped the paper out of shock, as his allowance and Hans' salary were gutted. He can't believe that bastard put his hands on his allowance. Through the headmaid he planted in his annex. However, embezzlement is a felony punishable by severe execution, even in noble society. The reason he could pull off such a stunt was because there was a gap in his defenses. After the passing of his mother, he entrusted the budget management to someone else. The former headmaid, Dana, who had stayed by his side for a long time. But instead, his brother made it this new headmaid who's obviously a part of his faction. She says it's the first time greeting him face to face like this, and it's a pleasure to see him. She introduces herself as Jenny, the new headmaid who was appointed to replace Ms. Dana. She wanted to greet him when she first got here, but back then he didn't come out of his room, and she assumes that long period of isolation must finally be over. Hans asks what kind of tone she's taking up with the young master, and Lucian tells him to calm down, as she's not wrong, but they'll skip the small talk today, as they have more important matters to discuss. He asks her directly if she had drafted this budget plan. She laughs, saying that she wondered why she was called here, and yes, she wrote it. Since the young master gave full authority to the former headmaid, she simply carried out her duties. But she must say she's perplexed to be interrogated like this when she's worked so diligently. This was originally work he should be doing himself. He says he knew she'd use this as an excuse, because it's clear it's his negligence that led to this. He says that it couldn't be helped. However, putting that aside, something doesn't add up. He confirmed that the majority of the funds his father reissued were allocated to raising the servants' salaries, and since they all suffered due to his negligence, one could consider it compensation. However, why was Hans' salary cut instead of raised? And that this is too blatant. She smiles, saying that must have been a mistake, and he knows how it is to manage a household. There are so many things to worry about, and everyone here can testify to how overworked she is. Obviously, they're scared of her, and she asks if they can back her up. Out of fear, they agree, and they say that they will assist her even better from now on. Lucian sighs, telling him they should just head back. Hans asks why, and he says the body is his, but the hands and feet are listening to someone else. He stops right before the door, telling Jenny he has one last question, and he wants her to answer carefully. Asking if she knows who the master she's supposed to follow is. She says regarding that, she will go ask Yorid. Lucian says that the tissue that is festered must be cut out for the body to live, and right now his heart is rotting. They head to an inn, and Hans says that he thought he was going fishing to calm his mind down, but the place they're in is notorious for having illegal fights. As we see that happening, Lucian asks if he feels it. This is the perfect place to catch a big fish. He walks up to the barkeep, who tells him that this isn't a place for kids like him to be snooping around, and to get lost while he's still being nice. Lucian puts the sack of money on the table, asking why a gambling den is so picky, and asks if maybe he's not wanting to take on new customers. If you've watched till the end, comment, engine fall, to let me know. Subscribe for more videos like this, leave a like or a comment to help the channel out. Thanks for watching.